Hello, and welcome to Fiction Fans, a podcast where we read books and other words too. I'm Lily.
And I'm Sarah, and I am so excited because we have with us today the wonderful Hannah and Laura of OWWR Pod, or On Wednesdays We Read. Welcome.
So good to be here.
I know, we're very excited. It's our first collab.
It's so exciting to have you on. We're thrilled.
We kind of called dibs a long time ago, so sorry about that.
You didn't know this, but we did.
We love having dibs called.
Yeah, we feel very honored to be here.
So tell our listeners a little bit about our pod. What do you guys talk about on that?
On our pod, we are two best friends, which is a very unique thing for a podcast to have two best friends talking on it.
It's never happened before.
It's very new. It's very unique. And as two best friends, we decided to do a deep dive into a book series, one book at a time. We do not have as an aggressive a reading schedule as you guys do. We do one book a month, but it is a very big book because for our first book series, we chose Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time.
Yeah, Hannah said, do you want to do a podcast with me? And I was like, sure. And she's like, we'll read one book a month. And I was like, okay. And she said, let's start with a 400 million book series.
I think your page schedule is actually worse than ours, honestly, just by page numbers.
Well, it doesn't help that I try to read every single book in 10 days between recording. Audiobooks are definitely helpful on our podcast.
Yes. Yeah. We love the audiobooks.
But we break it up. We do the plot in 2 episodes where we tell everyone the plot. So even if you have never read The Wheel of Time and you don't want to, you can hear about it from us in 3
very
hours.
Detailed.
Yes, very detailed, 3-hour chunks. And then in the next episodes, we discuss the boys of Wheel of Time. We always say the boys because none of them are men. They're boys. And then we discuss the women in the next week as a closing. So just different themes each week.
It's very fun. I've been listening and I am really enjoying your, what's the word I'm looking for? This is starting off well.
Strong opinions.
I was going to say interrogation of the text.
I was an English major, so we definitely interrogate the text a lot.
Cheers.
I just have a lot of opinions.
It helps. Laura has aggressive opinions.
Well, that's what we like here on Fiction Fans.
I'm so excited to be here because I listen to you guys when I'm doing chores out in my barn. And it's a rare podcast that my goats actually like.
Goat approved.
You guys are goat approved.
Bio or Twitter bio.
When I'm milking goats, I've tried other podcasts and, they do not like the sound of Jason Mantzoukas' voice. I'm calling him out right now. He's too loud for my goats.
You definitely know he's a lister, so he's going to hear about this.
I know he listens. So, Jason, tone it down, please. But no, they actually, I think, really like your podcast. So
can we edit our Twitter header image to say Laura's goats approve?
I mean, yes. Especially for this episode, yes.
We can send you some pictures to include in the banner. You just have some goats and then it says Laura's goats approve.
I love that
like
idea.
this thought.
Well, I'm changing my something good that happened this week to finding that out. That's my new answer.
You guys have soothing voices. Let's just put it that way.
My old one was fireworks, which is the least soothing sound on the face of the planet. So probably an overall improvement.
I'd agree.
How about everyone else? What's something great that's happened this week?
So I was walking my dogs this afternoon, and a woman who was also walking her dog stopped me to say, "Oh, your pugs are so cute. They're the cutest dogs I've ever seen." And I was like, "Thanks, your dog is really cute too." And she said, "Yours are cuter." So
I felt the first rule of pet.
Yeah. I felt bad for her dog, who was cute.
Aww.
I mean, the pugs are cuter, but so that's my good thing.
Self-aware dog owners.
You have to be honest.
My good thing of the week. Oh, I should say this. I'm Hannah for people who don't listen to our pod. You guys announced us and then we didn't name ourselves. So apologies on that. I found out I'm a hiker this week. I'm out in Denver for a week and have been taking my dog on hikes. She's a very tiny dog, but she has the skills of jumping almost 5 feet in the air.
Oh my.
And so mountain climbing has been a breeze for her. She took to it and I took to it. I'm really vibing with hiking. We live in Illinois, so we do not get these opportunities often.
Definitely not.
That sounds lovely.
And I'm Laura. And this week, I enjoyed having a long weekend and I got Monday off and I did a lot of baking. So that was really nice to have some alone time, do some baking. And I really enjoyed it.
Oh,
What were you baking?
yeah, I was going to say, you can't tease us like that.
A lot of cookies. I made like 8 dozen cookies and then I made 4 loaves of bread. So it was a lot of baking.
So I'm going to get on a plane and fly to Illinois so I can have some of your cookies and bread.
And talk to her goats.
And talk to your
definitely.
goats.
Definitely.
Laura, I am stopping off at my dad's house on Saturday. I do expect cookies when I arrive.
I can probably make that happen.
Perfect. Make sure it's Saturday. He will eat all the cookies if I'm not there within a couple hours.
Okay.
As always, we have to ask, what is everyone drinking tonight?
I'm drinking white wine tonight, which I don't have much to say about it. It's white wine from a bottle that opened without a cork bottle opener. It's a screw cap.
That's the best kind of wine.
The go-to with wine.
Yeah. It makes life easier.
I have a beer from a residential Denver brewery. When I ordered it, I expected it to come out in like a growler because I asked for one to go and they just gave me a nice plastic cup with a lid on it. So I felt
Wow.
very classy walking back to my Airbnb with this beautiful cup of beer and half a pizza. So
Everyone was jealous of you.
yes, I looked like I was having a raging night podcasting. So
And we are. They were right.
exactly.
I am also drinking a really classy drink of V8 Berry Blend, locally sourced from my local grocery store.
Delicious.
Laura's a big fan of V8.
Yeah.
Very boring.
That's not boring. I don't think so. Sounds good. My beverage this evening is a mimosa with bottom shelf sparkling wine. But it's a little fancy because I'm using pineapple orange banana juice instead of just orange juice.
Ooh.
Very fancy.
It's got vitamins in it.
It's healthy.
There you go. I wasn't going to go that far.
I like the vibe of a mimosa at night. Like that's a nice vibe.
Yeah.
Well, I think drinks should not be constrained by time of day. Other than our absurd podcast reading schedules, anyone read anything good lately?
Last week was when we had to finish the plot episode. So I read the 5th book of the Wheel of Time. And
I also read the 5th book of the Wheel of Time.
I will say the spoilers for our podcast, we ranked them this week. And the 5th book was my favorite and
Ooh.
Laura's second favorite. So
Yeah. I think it's maybe tied for my favorite so far. 4 and 5.
it's been the best so far. It had like the best plot and the best dynamics going on.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I think 4, I really enjoyed 4 because, at least I'm pretty sure it's 4, because the battle at the very end I just found really cinematic.
I have a hard time getting my head wrapped around Jordan battles because
Hannah has a hard time with the instantaneous battle scenes.
and then stuff is happening and I'm like, wait, what? Because again, I read these books on a very tight schedule. So sometimes I'm definitely listening, but it's only like part of me is also elsewhere. So sometimes I'm just like, oh, we're suddenly in a battle because it happened 2 sentences ago.
They can be a little bit abrupt.
Yes. But I did like the ending battle of book 4 once I realized I was reading a battle scene.
Do you guys do that crazy thing where you turn the speed up on audiobooks? I've heard of people doing. Yeah, really?
I
Wow.
listened to all podcasts at 1.5 speed. My dad once told me he didn't trust my political podcasts because they were talking too fast. And I was like, they're not talking that fast. So
I feel like once you get used to 1.5 speed, it's really hard to listen at regular speed.
yes, people sound like they're taking so many deep breaths. So,
Yeah. Pauses in sentences, in between sentences, seem like ages.
Fascinating.
you have to start like with a 1.2 and work your way up in an audiobook.
Mhm.
That is my recommendation.
Maybe I'm just not an audio learner. There's a better word for that. But
No, I think that's the word.
is that it? Okay.
Yeah.
I cannot absorb information at that speed if I'm listening to it. I've listened to books at regular speed and then also have to rewind constantly. But it ends up being faster to read them with words. But
Yeah.
everyone's different.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer, if you couldn't tell from my distraction tactics. I read American Hippo, which I'm very excited to talk about, but that does not answer this question. Sarah, I suspect your answer is also what we're about to talk about.
My answer, yeah, because normally we don't record 2 weeks in a row, but we are this time. And so I haven't had a chance to really do any. I did manage to finish Towers of Midnight, which was book 13 of Wheel of Time, but that was only that wasn't very many pages. So that wasn't a lot of reading.
And disclaimer, this is a non-spoiler conversation of Wheel of Time.
Thank you.
We wouldn't do that to you.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to go into spoilers. Don't worry.
Can you imagine if we just invited them onto our podcast and we're
and you just came on and you were like, guess what? Tom is Elaine's father.
It's Laura's favorite theory that we both know she's definitely wrong about, but she just keeps talking about it. Like, I really think Jordan should have made Tom Elaine's father.
I mean, he really hints at it, and I hate that it's just a throwaway plot.
I mean, I don't want to give you spoilers.
If this is actually a thing, people please email us at ourpod@gmail.com.
There is one thing for quick Wheel of Time check-in, though, that I'm going to keep as vague and spoiler-free as possible, but I just wanted to mention it because there's a revelation that this one minor character is actually someone who has stories told about him and legends about him. And then he goes off and dies in a 2 paragraphs later in a way that is so not unique. Anyone could have done that. It didn't need to be this one hero. And so it feels like a wasted revelation. What was the point of that? It was frustrating.
This seems very on brand Robert Jordan.
I kind of wonder if this is something that Robert Jordan left a note for Brandon Sanderson, this is who this character is, and then Sanderson just had no idea of what he wanted to do with it. So it was okay, I'll show it here, and then he's just going to die.
They sadly died of pneumonia because I don't know what to do with them.
There's also apparently, I was looking him up online afterwards, and there's a lot of information about him that just it doesn't show up in the books. And I was like, this kind of feels like it would have been nice to know. You could have worked it in somehow.
He could have left out 70 of Nynaeve pulling on her braid and spent an extra paragraph going into the history of this character.
Or
Exactly.
all the mentions of Perrin's beard.
Exactly.
Min's curly hair.
There's some extraneous material that could have been cut to allow for this.
Yes.
I don't know. That all sounded like hair to me, which is very specific.
It's a weird hair thing.
He has a very specific hair thing and a butt thing, but you already knew about that. I think Sarah has discussed this.
Lots of spanking.
Yeah.
We have drawn our own conclusions about that, trust me. Is there any other Wheel of Time?
You really don't want to get us started because we'll go on to every single trope we've noticed and talk about ad nauseum on our podcast. So we discussed 2 episodes ago about how he always has women folding their arms under their breasts, and we tried to do it, and it's that's not comfortable.
How
you
long
don't
do you
naturally
think my
do that.
forearm is?
Right. We have long arms. We can't just be folding them under our breasts like that. So sorry to keep this not clean as usual, but
on our podcast, explicit content? I never.
So for this episode, we are reading American Hippo, or we read American Hippo, which is a collection of 4 novellas, or 2 novellas and 2 very short stories by author Sarah Gailey that was published the original novellas came out in 2017, but American Hippo came out in 2018. And it is basically Wild West, but not actually set in the West, and it has hippos.
It's a alternative history, right? I learned that genre recently. Now I'm going to use it for everything. What if the United States had imported hippos and cowboys actually wrangled hippos, which is fantastic.
Just as a concept.
I wish it would have happened.
I know. As a concept, it really intrigued me. And I was like, I need to read this.
at the beginning of the novel, they put in like an author's note saying that Congress did try to pass something about hippo meat. And they said, like, look this up. It's a real thing. And I didn't look it up. So I don't know if it's a real thing, but I wondered.
I looked it up. It is a real thing.
Thank you.
It didn't get passed.
Yeah, it didn't get passed, but it was introduced.
Like, this is kind of over the top and very hard to execute. So
what a bunch of cowards.
But I love that Sarah Gailey randomly looked up facts that you wouldn't know and saw hippos and was like, I can make a Western about that.
I know. How creative.
It's the greatest. I also have constantly been describing this as the Wild West, but with hippos. And then catching myself and realizing the Mississippi is not in the West. But it just has that ambiance of a Western, I felt.
Yes. Well, and it's like they often go into Louisiana, which is like the south and west of things. So
it's west of somewhere.
Yes, it's west of somewhere. So
I mean, I think that I take it back. I was going to say it says something about the Wild West on the back of the book.
Well, one of the characters is described as being the fastest shot in the West, which maybe he was, but that's not where he was at the time.
Right.
So I felt vindicated because also the book got itself confused, or the characters in the book.
Something that I really liked about it was that it was a queer norm world with just a lot of great representation. This may say more about my reading than it does about the state of like science fiction and fantasy as a genre, but I haven't read any books really before this that have a non-binary character as a main character or a main love interest.
I would agree that I haven't seen many non-binary as a main character, and especially in books like this, like a weird alternative history, Wild West, just kind of like a fun novel. Like I feel like sometimes when you have a non-binary character, it's like it has to be dark, but this book is not dark. It's just light and fun. And I liked reading about these characters.
Well, it's so nice reading a book with diverse characters where the plot of the book is not about their diversity.
Right.
Those stories are very important, of course, but sometimes you just want to read a fun book.
It was nice to just see the casual representation. Like just these people exist. There's diverse people in the world, and that should be represented in books.
Agreed. Has anyone read the Arc of the Scythe series? By Neil Shusterman? So in the third book of that trilogy, there's actually a gender fluid character, and they have a love interest, but it's definitely something in that novel where that character is pointed out all the time for being gender fluid, to the point where it kind of bogs down the story a little because it's constantly pointed out, where American Hippo was kind of a breath of fresh air. Like you said, that character was just able to be non-binary and it wasn't questioned.
Right. And Hero is their name in the book. But also, well, Archie is not gender fluid, but she does definitely toe the line of gender conformity. Confines. Thank you. And I think maybe she stands out a little bit more than Hero does in the world, but usually because people are pointing out her weight, which is sort of an interesting, different perspective.
Yeah, I really liked Archie's, they do point out that Archie is a fat person, but that's usually, it's not like as an insult. It's usually just people describing how she moves in the world. And also a lot of times, a fat person is usually there's a lot of stereotypes with fat phobic things. They're either gross or they're very sweet and they want to take care of everyone and motherly. And I think Archie isn't confined by that either. She moves throughout the world the way she wants. She has the most love interests and she just seduces people.
Archie's very desirable to people.
Yeah, people like her and they find her desirable. And I loved, and she moves freely. She's a great pickpocket. And I thought that I just think the representation overall in this world was great and didn't hold people back.
It was nice to see characters who have that representation, but that's not the focus. They're well-rounded characters in and of themselves, and it's just this is one aspect of them, but they feel like actual people rather than just like caricatures.
Right. It's a small detail.
Mm-hmm.
Hero is the bomb specialist, right? The detonation technician.
Right.
And that's really their character and their arc and what they deal with, their career. Most of these characters are dealing with their careers at the end of the day, and how that fits into a changing world and their changing goals. And everything else is just sort of coincidental.
I do want to note, like, there's also representation. There's a bisexual character, and there is a woman who seems to be Hispanic or Latinx in some way, and she's pregnant, and that's great representation because she's still doing her job as like severely pregnant. But something I noticed when I was reading it was that Hero was never characterized as either assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth. The author was very specific in not giving those types of details. And I thought that was amazing because I think a lot of times, like, if you want to make, non-binary a part of their character, some people have to spell out what they were before, and that just doesn't matter to the story. They're just a person who still has romance, who still, has all that stuff going on in the background. And they just happen to have been non-binary, and there's nothing before that. And I thought that was amazing.
Agreed.
I feel like Gailey dangled that question at us a couple times. Hero kept expecting someone to ask a question, and they were getting really annoyed at it. But then when we did find out what question they didn't want to be asked, it was about their career, and it made me feel like the asshole. It was not what I was expecting their annoyed question to be.
It's okay, because while I loved that this was an element of the book, I did find myself like definitely reading into certain paragraphs saying, like, are they saying Hero was born a male or a female? And I was like, it doesn't matter. I don't know why I care. It's just like when you're reading a novel, you want to know all the answers. So like, no, just don't question it. Just enjoy.
Mm-hmm. But I like that Gailey sort of preemptively called us out on that, or I felt like that was what was happening there. And it made me laugh at myself and notice what I was doing. We mentioned that this is a Wild West story, even if it takes place in the South. And I have to say, it was so cheesy over the top. It actually took me a little while to get into the tone of the book, just because it was so, I don't even want to say silly, because it
has a really silly premise. Like, So if you're starting there, the baseline for silliness is set pretty high.
That's true.
Sometimes when I'm reading silly novels, I just call them breeze reads. Like, you're just supposed to like feel the breeze, let it hit you, and enjoy. And that's a better way, because I feel like that doesn't have negative connotations to it.
Well, I don't have a problem with silly as with connotations. I just don't think it's silly because it is graphically violent in some parts, which I think maybe changes the tone from silly to something else a little bit.
I feel like it wasn't so much silly as it was over the top in a good way. Like, I enjoyed it, but it definitely ratcheted up everything to another level, like premise, plot, violence.
One of the first antagonists we meet was just such a comic villain that I kind of couldn't take him seriously.
Everyone could call that from a mile away.
Right?
Yeah, that was not shocking.
Within the first paragraph of that character being introduced, you're like, oh, yeah, obviously that one burned down the ranch.
Yeah.
He's the villain. And
then when the book tells us that, it kind of felt like it was supposed to be a reveal. And I was like, really? I don't know if I figured it out quick, but like, obviously not. I think that could have been dealt with just in the text with more understanding that we already know. It's fine for the characters to be discovering it, but I felt like it was written as though we were also finding out, which kind of felt a little flat to me.
I would definitely agree. It is a very, like, I think it's right. It's a very over the top novel. Everything is raised to like the nth degree. Like, you can't just have, a woman who's pregnant. She's 9 months pregnant, like, you can't just have a villain. It's the villain sitting over there in the corner, twirling his mustache, holding a sign. Yeah. Like saying, I'm an evil villain. Like, but if you think about it, like, hippos are such a dangerous animal that like it's gonna be crazy if you introduce them into life and there's just like boats trying to go by where there are these like rabid hippos everywhere. It's ridiculous.
Oh, we got to talk about the hippos. Sarah Gailey wrote these hippos to be so freaking adorable and completely terrifying at the same time.
I think that's accurate of hippos in real life.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Like, that's right.
At any moment, I was prepared to fall in love or be terrified of a hippo. It's just on the flip of a coin. I was there completely in both directions at all times.
In this book, like they breed hippos that are like meant to be ridden, but then you also have rabid hippos that are just like running along the Mississippi. And so when you meet the ones who are like bred to be like pets, like these owners love their pets and the pets are very cute. And hippos are adorable. Laura and I were sending each other gifts of hippos. And
I looked up a lot of hippo stuff today, and I saw a lot of cute things like Fiona the hippo, baby pygmy hippos. And then I saw a lot of really scary things like the fact that hippos are the most dangerous animal on the planet besides humans. So they are very terrifying and yet also very cute.
I feel like it's kind of like the difference between dogs, like which are domesticated animals, and wolves, which have some of the same genetic material, but are not domesticated in any sort of way and are going to treat you very differently. So you have the domesticated hippos who are a little gentler, who can be ridden, and then you have the feral hippos who are just going to kill you and do kill you.
Kill you a lot.
Yeah. There's a lot of death by hippo in this.
in very graphic ways. We cannot say that enough. It was very graphic.
I think this should stand as our content warning for the spoiler section. This book is very bloody. It's fun in a lot of ways, but if you're not up for graphic violence, it's probably not the book for you.
I did not know what I was getting into when I suggested this book. I mean, maybe I should have, because as we've said, hippos are quite dangerous. But I somehow never expect that level of violence. Maybe this is just evidence that I'm not actually like a grimdark reader. Not that I would call this grimdark, but...
Well, the book also never fades to black on the violence. You know, it doesn't cut away or imply anything. We as the readers are always seeing it happen with as much, if not more detail than the people experiencing it.
The author is very good at writing violence. It's a little concerning.
That being said, those pet hippos, man, they were so cute. And they all had like cute nicknames, which is accurate.
They were definitely very cute. People who listen to our podcast know this. I have trouble with names. Like, I can't remember a name to save my life and depend on Laura for 80% of names. So I kept being like, wait, Ruby, Rosa, which one's which? And then I was like, there's Abigail, there's Adelia, there's Archie. Like, I can't, there's too many names. Like, you need to learn more of the alphabet. I can't do that. So maybe make a chart if you're bad with names. That's all I'm going to say. I didn't. I'm lazy, but yeah.
No, that's a really good point. I definitely had to reread sections to figure out who was here at the moment.
I have a question. So you were saying that you found it kind of over the top in a way that didn't always work for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if, because of the format, because Gailey wrote this as two novellas that take place basically one after the other, like if it had been written initially as a novel, do you think that some of the kind of abruptness of the villainy or some of the plot aspect, like, do you think that there would have been time to smooth over some of those issues that you found that you had with it?
That's possible. I definitely didn't realize this was originally written as two different pieces. I have it as an ebook, and I just bought American Hippo and then started reading it.
Well, American Hippo, the paperback copy that I have too is just a paperback, but it does say on the back, to be fair, it does say on the back that it was two action-packed novellas.
Yeah,
I
don't have a back.
I think if you look at it from the standpoint of it being two novellas, it makes more sense, definitely, how over the top and how rushed certain things are. Like some of the relationships, when I was reading, I'm like, that seems a little sudden, but it makes more sense if they were novellas because you don't have as much time.
I think I had the exact same note about the exact same couple. And I actually think that, well, I don't want to get into that I would like to talk about that with spoilers. Yeah, I think if it had originally been written with the full arc as one piece in mind, then maybe the pacing would have been a little different. Maybe the first chunk would have been longer, the second chunk shorter, or maybe more lead up. I don't know. One of the villain's nonsense is so over the top and unrealistic that it was just a little hard for me to suspend disbelief in some parts. And I don't, I'll say it. You guys can tell me if it's a spoiler and I'll cut it. At one point, the villain cuts off someone's ear and then says, "Don't tell so-and-so what just happened." My guy, you cut off his ear. That's not subtle. Like, do you expect no one to notice that this person is suddenly missing an ear?
He may wear a lot of hats. We didn't get that info. So
I did find that incredibly weird when it happened. And I was like, you just cut off his ear. He's going to know something happened. Like,
yeah.
It was a weird thing too, where it was like half of the ear.
Yeah.
It was just very bizarre. And I do think I gave this book a little bit more allowances, like Sarah said, because I knew it was 2 novellas. So I was like, oh, these are just 2 tiny books. So I do think it helps you suspend your disbelief a little bit more to like know what board game you're playing pretty much. Like, oh, this is just going to be a quick like jaunt into this book and then another book. So, but things definitely felt rushed a lot of the time. I agree with you on that.
I feel like the format had a lot to do with it, and that if it had been conceived of as a longer novel, we maybe would have gotten more like exploration of character motivations and more even pacing. I don't know. I just thought I would pose the question.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think once I bought in, because, I read it, I did eventually buy in to the concept and the format as a whole. I was fine. I was on board. I was like, okay, this is just the type of book this is. I felt like it was almost Tarantino movie-esque. Like, I really felt like it was Kill Bill a little bit, just with the absurd violence and the very quick pacing, and you get a second of backstory motivation and then we're off to the races. There wasn't a lot of...
I would watch that movie though.
Yeah.
Like I would watch the American Hippo movie.
It was very Ocean's 11.
I did laugh a little that you said Tarantino and then you picked Kill Bill and not the cowboy one.
Yeah. I mean, that's also, yeah.
Because that cowboy one, I remember watching that Tarantino film. I can't remember the name of it. I'm terrible with names. This is just
that's why I didn't pick it.
Okay, good. I'm just more willing to say I don't know the name of it, but I do remember watching it. And it felt so rushed, just like this book. Like, they were just randomly, you would find something out. And I'm like, this is information I needed for 5 minutes, not 2. Like,
it was The Hateful Eight. That's the movie we're thinking of.
I was going to guess that, but I didn't want to be wrong because Tarantino fans are very sharp with their...
I'm wrong on this podcast all the time, so...
My problem is that there's an Adam Sandler parody called The Something 6, and I really didn't want to mix those up.
Probably extremely similar.
They both have numbers in the name. It's the same movie, right? That's how movies work.
Exactly.
Hateful Eight, 101 Dalmatians, same movie.
Mm-hmm.
7.
300. So other than some pacing issues and maybe taking a minute to be fully on board with the style of this book, or these novellas, I should say, why should someone read this book? These novellas. I'm going to say book. It's one book.
It's formatted as one book. Yeah. I mean, I think you can say one book. If you want over-the-top Tarantino-esque hippo violence with really interesting, diverse characters, I think that this is a book that is well worth checking out.
I think the diversity is what does it for me. That's the reason to read it.
It's diverse and fun. That's why I would recommend it. Diversity and just fun.
Yeah, the hijinks, the heist plot was wonderful. I just had to It just took me a little bit to get into the groove, so to speak. But once it was such a fun experience, like you said, Hannah. It's a fun book. It's a quick book, too. It doesn't take that long. Just read it for the hell of it. That's why you should read it.
Read it for the hippos.
Yeah. Oh, I have a loose theory, not a serious theory. Is Hopper, their nickname for hippo cowboys, a sort of descendant of the word hippo in a Southern accent? It kind of sounds like it. I'm not going to try it because I'll do it.
Someone
bad.
say it in an accent.
No, I just said no. Someone else say it.
I don't think I can.
It takes a minute for me to get into my Southern accent because it would be like,
Hannah, try your British one because the main character was British.
There you go.
but I can't do a British accent. Okay.
I'm always trying to get Hannah to do accents.
Well, you're welcome for the.
I might actually try the hippo one in the Southern accent, just like, because you got the Southern drawl and you call it a hippo, but it'd be like a hippo. It wouldn't be like Hopper, you know?
Oh, yeah. So you think it'd be more of a hip?
Yeah, hippo. Yeah.
Okay. That was just my theory.
Lenny just brought Laura so much joy. Look at her face.
Well, thank you for proving me wrong.
Or maybe I just do a bad Southern accent. We don't know.
I'm sure
was
there's
pretty
more
good.
than one. Maybe it's more from a different region of the Mississippi or something.
That's true.
I can't pick them all out.
And
There's so
maybe
many
it's a
different-
British Southern accent because the main character was often confused. Other characters were often confused as to whether the main character was British or had a Southern accent.
I could not get my head around what his accent sounded like.
I don't know either. That's why I'm bringing this up.
I think at some point we find out that what's his name?
Houndstooth.
Houndstooth, thank you. I was going to say Humboldt, and that was wrong. I think at some point we find out that Houndstooth is from England, but has lived in many places in the South and sort of picks up accents as a hobby and tries to mimic them so he can blend in.
He definitely does that. But they also say at the beginning, like his regular accent is like British, but with some Southern drawl added in. And I was like, what does that sound like?
Well, he's been in the US since he was like a teenager, right? So
Yeah.
it makes sense that he would pick up, at that point, he would pick up a little bit of an accent.
Oh, it makes sense. I just can't imagine.
Same. That's definitely what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I can't picture it in my head, like as he talks.
Mm-mm. Archie, on the other hand, who has a French accent, I actually thought was written out very well. It wasn't overwhelming. That part wasn't cheesy.
Mm-hmm.
It was just some dropped H's, which was fine.
I know I've gone on a rant on the podcast before about how phonetically spelled out accents really bother me, but I think this is, like you say, an example of one that's done well, in that it's not overpowering and you can still understand what she's saying. Like, it's not every other like vowel is removed.
She also uses French expressions often, which I have a tenuous grasp of high school French,
Same.
and I felt like I could plug along.
Same.
I don't know if anyone doesn't, but I'm very curious how well the context revealed that.
I don't know anything about French. I barely know English, so I'm just throwing that out there.
So when you were reading Archie's dialogue, the context clues were enough, I thought, even if I didn't understand every other word sometimes, I would still get like, that's a curse word.
Right.
Yeah.
Or my love or something
Yeah.
like that. Mm-hmm.
I think the context clues were there for everything except at one point she calls her hippo her beautiful little egg. And I was like, really? Like,
You're
'cause
calling that out on the science, right? Because that's a mammal.
Maybe Archie didn't know that. Maybe she thought hippos were like platypuses.
Right.
To avoid spoilers for American Hippo, skip to 1:11:27.
We've covered a little bit how this book was fairly gory and gruesome, unexpectedly so, but I think the first inkling that I had that we were actually going to see a lot of that death was when Neville died, and I was just not expecting it. Neville was like a young boy who was tagging along with the heist crew for a while and caring for Archie's hippo, and he gets eaten by feral hippos, basically, and it was just graphic. I was surprised.
Well, and then later you find out like the evil man in the first book probably released the hippo to go after them and like knew one of them was going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And so like this poor child died because of this evil person and you feel so terrible for him. And like Archie feels awful because she let him tag along. It was just so sad. I felt very bad for him.
Yeah, that I wanted him to like, I don't know, have a good life with hippos, not have that ending.
I was really excited because Archie is great and her having a little, not accomplice, intern? Sidekick. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Little mentee.
I like calling him an intern though.
It's kind of like a mentee-mentor relationship.
Yeah.
But I will put in my vote for hippo intern.
And the point where he dies, we have just, the whole crew has finally come together. We're starting to get a feel for the personalities and how they fit and starting to actually get invested in them, or at least I was at that point. And I think he's the first character death. And it is, it's the sweet little kid. He's under 10, right? He's definitely not a teenager.
He was definitely very young.
Yeah.
I thought I was a kid.
Yeah.
I thought he was like in the 11 to 12 range, like not old, but maybe not quite as young as you were imagining him.
Yeah. Anyway, around there somewhere. And just watching the characters react was also very interesting because obviously they're not heartless. They didn't like that happened. And like,
right.
I did like that the characters' reactions were to kill the hippo, though. Like, they weren't going to just let the hippo get away. They were like, no, we're going to avenge this child's death. Like, and they all joined in together. It's not like one person just sitting on the sideline being like, hey, it happens. You know?
Mm-hmm.
It definitely gives us a different insight into the characters and how they work together. Because until this point, they've all sort of, been bristling. There's been some posturing at each other. There's some ego going on. And this is the first part where the stakes are very real and they kind of just have to get it together or else.
Yeah, this is the first moment where they really have to work together, even if it's not fast enough to actually save Neville.
Mm-hmm. Another character who does not die is Hero. I have to say, their near-death experience was, well, because it came after Neville being gruesomely killed, I was completely on board with Hero could die right now. I think Calhoun had also previously died.
Yeah, Cal
had already died.
Yeah.
So that establishes that the people in this crew they do not have plot armor.
Gailey is not afraid to kill people off.
No,
they are not.
So Hero is going through this, is horribly wounded. It's definitely, we think they are dying. But I'm so glad it was revealed that on the next page, it was not a mortal wound. I think if we as readers had been strung along, even for a whole chapter or two, assuming that Hero was dead and then finding out they weren't, that would have felt a little cheap. I don't know.
think it would have felt as cheap if it had been a longer story. Like, I think that because of the short format, you really needed that tight turnaround.
Speaking of rushed storytelling, Laura, we're complaining about Hero and Houndstooth, right?
Yes. Okay, they've known each other how long, and they're in love?
6 hours. I would say it's about 6 hours before they fall in love.
I have mixed feelings. Well, I don't about the beginning. The beginning is rushed. There's that camping scene where they have that moment, and that was like way too much too soon in my opinion. But then it cools off. Their relationship cools off and goes just back to like veiled flirting for a good chunk of the book. And for me, that was just a way of establishing very early on their dynamic is that they're into each other. Okay, now let's have the tension later. so it kind of like I came back around, and obviously once they were, obviously I was really upset when Hero died or didn't die, but I thought they did for a second. And at the end, when they do get reunited, that felt very emotionally satisfying. So I think Gailey brought me back around. Just the beginning was, like I said, everything was so over the top, it was hard for me to be completely on board. And that was definitely part of it.
Yeah, I think overall I had a hard time with that relationship because it did seem so rushed. This is something that Hannah and I talk about a lot on our pod, where Robert Jordan rushes romances, and it's, I think, something that I get bothered by in books where there's no actual build up to the relationship, because sometimes it just doesn't make sense for people to know each other for 6 hours and then be madly in love. So I think it was hard for me to get on board with that relationship. I do think that the dynamic between them and the flirting between Houndstooth and Hero was fine, and that their interactions were fine and seemed loving, and that they cared about each other. But for me, it was just very hard to believe that they did love each other, considering they had no build up to their relationship.
It's funny because like this exact thing is kind of what I was complaining about in the in the episode that for us, as we're recording, just released, but by the time this actually comes out will have been a couple of weeks ago in Wheel of Time. So that's where my thoughts went to. But it felt a little bit, because Lily, like you say, the relationship cools off. It felt more like there was this instant attraction, and then they actually have to work out the logistics of, well, do we actually have an emotional connection and do we like each other, rather than just we're madly in love and we're going to go get married, the instant we can.
Yeah.
So when I first read their first scene with tension, I thought they had known each other for longer, because like he knows where they live. He's like, hey, we're going on this adventure, come with. And they're like, okay. And then I realized in the next scene, when they're in a boat room to themselves, that they're going to be sharing a bedroom, that they don't know each other. And I was like, in what world are you on this journey for a day? And he's like, we'll have one room. I know it already.
And that was confusing too, Hannah. That's a very good point, because how would he have known to get with them?
Yeah.
Maybe they only had the funding for one room.
But no, because the guy was just like, well, there's 6 rooms available. So they have a limited number of space. But how did like the evil guy know that they would definitely want to like have one room? It made 0 sense. And then at the end, Hero is like, yeah, we've talked about it. We're going to own a ranch together. And I was like, when did you talk about it?
I assumed that was pillow talk. Because
but that's so random.
I don't know. Gailey does not fade to black on violence, but we don't actually see the consummation of that relationship, to be polite about it. And I assumed that they had conversations we didn't see. I feel like the relationship between Hero and Houndstooth is an instant attraction. No, Sarah used the word attraction.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like they were in love from the beginning. I think they were super into each other. And then we are sort of seeing that build and progress. And then they decide whether or not they can trust each other, etc. And I do think there's definitely we know there's pillow talk we didn't see. And so I'm okay with filling in those blanks. It was just that very early scene where Houndstooth is trusting Hero with information that he clearly doesn't want to talk about, that felt really rushed and forced. I'm okay with them being into each other. I'm not okay with that level of intimacy based on how these characters have been portrayed until now.
So for people who want to read this, I suggest reading it like you think they've known each other for years, because that's how I read it. And then it was just a very sweet scene between 2 people who have always been attracted to each other and never been able to admit it.
To people who have not always been attracted to each other and never able to admit it are Archie and Houndstooth. They are my bro TP, which, in case anyone listening doesn't know weird fan fiction slang, TP is one true pair, and so bro TP are friends that you support being friends. That was a lot of explanation for one bad joke, but
But now it's canon of your podcast and you can say it whenever you want and you don't have to explain it again. So you just laid groundwork.
Is that how it works?
Yeah. You just never, that's like people, Laura and I constantly make jokes about redheads being portrayed in media as just brunettes who dyed their hair. Like anytime you see, it's a trademark. And we refuse to explain that that's a running gag. We're just going to keep talking about it.
Well, all right. I always am hesitant. Well, I'm not hesitant to use obscure fan fiction slang, but I feel like it's more accessible if I explain what the hell I'm talking about, which always ruins the joke, but it's probably worth it in the long run.
I want to say that OTP isn't obscure, but then I'm also deep into the fan fiction. Like,
yeah, you're
reading,
you're not a good judge.
I'm not a good judge.
I will say I'm not deep into fan fiction anymore. I very much was in high school. So, but like I know OTP, and I do think like the younger generation uses OTP for like TV shows a lot, but I had not heard the bro TP yet. So I learned something new today and I'm glad you taught it to me.
You're welcome.
I also appreciated the explanation.
Good. But because now you know Archie and Houndstooth are the bro TP.
They have a really great friend relationship. So I've complained about on the podcast before about not letting people just be friends. And so I really appreciate, I mean, this book is not a book that's devoid of romance. Like there are romantic relationships in it. But I really liked seeing just a strong friendship between a man and a woman, because in my opinion, we don't get that enough. Like just let friends be friends. There doesn't have to be sexual tension there.
I would specifically say two people whose orientations overlap, right? Because you get the girl with a gay best friend all the time. That's a trope in and of itself.
Yeah.
But these are people who technically are within the other one's purview, but they're just really good friends. And it's really nice.
I agree to all of that. I have like nothing to add. I think that they're a beautiful pairing. I love to see men and women who have overlapping orientations be friends. I think that that's perfect. And I was really happy with that representation in the book.
Archie has this really great quote about marriage that I liked, where Archie is talking with her romantic love interest,
Carter,
and he is saying that what is he saying?
Well, he's saying she has to quit the business if they can get married. Like he doesn't want, because he is a United States Marshal, so he tries to fight criminals, and Archie is like a pickpocket and she's a rogue and she is a criminal. So he's like, if we get married, you're done.
Exactly. Thank you, Hannah. And she says, I mean, she has a great monologue that's longer than just what I'm going to quote, but she says, "You will marry me as I am. You will love me for who I am and for what I am great at, or you won't marry me at all, Grand Carter." And I just like, it's nice to see someone who is standing up for herself. Like she's not sacrificing her wishes and her dreams for the future for a man.
I think that's really important too, that people need to recognize in media that just because someone enters into a relationship does not mean that they lose their identity and their likes, dislikes, and they don't just become linked to this person and that's all there is to them.
Yes, exactly.
Well, and it's admitting that just love is not enough for you as a person, because later on someone asks, what if he can't accept you for who you are? And she said, I guess I'll have to deal with the heartache. I've done that before. And so it's showing that like love isn't the only thing that matters. You have so much more to yourself. And if he's not right for you, he's not right for you. So I loved that. I loved that part.
Absolutely.
I just found it really powerful and a nice change of pace from a lot of novels.
Agreed.
Her relationship with Carter is incredible in many different ways. I'm stepping on your toes, Sarah, because I know you have this quote in our notes. But because later after this, obviously he done fucked up, right? But it's not the explosive end of their relationship. She doesn't burn all his love letters. She allows him the chance to redeem himself, which this story is acknowledging the fallibility of humans, which is also very important in relationships. And for people to see played out in this way. And they don't have a right off into the sunset happy ending, but I would say they definitely have an optimistic one.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a theme of forgiveness. Like the quote that I had pulled out was about love actually being about giving someone a chance to earn your forgiveness, even if you don't forgive them immediately. So it emphasizes that there's work that's involved in a relationship. And you're right that you don't always see that work in fiction.
Maybe that's why this relationship feels better to me as a reader than Hero and Houndstooth, who seem to meet. There's some escalation, but then they have just decided to run off and start a ranch together. They are going to ride off into the sunset together, and it doesn't feel like it has the same thoughtfulness as Archie and Carter's progression.
I think there's just more nuance to the relationship of Archie and Carter than there is to that of Hero and Houndstooth.
I will say I think there's more nuance to the relationship, but Carter was one of the characters who I just didn't care that much about because he came in so late to the game. And I do think unfortunately the author's more telling you about their relationship than showing you. They have moments, but when he was like, well, when we get married, and Archie was like, yeah, we're going to get married. I was like, oh, you guys agreed to that? I didn't know this about your relationship. Archie seems to be kind of getting around, not in a bad way, but she was using her, sexuality. So when did you guys decide that? It was just a little bit bizarre to be their relationship. It just felt rushed in similar ways. But I think Archie brought so much to the table that's why their relationship was more nuanced. It was just Archie brings so much to this book.
Yeah.
I think because we don't see Carter, I believe or I understand that their relationship is happening entirely off screen. They did meet before the book started. We know that at least. So there is an amount of understanding that I don't know all of the backstory. I haven't seen them fall in love. I am jumping into this story when they are halfway through it already, as far as the story of their relationship goes. And so when there are blind spots, it's easier for me to fill it in versus Houndstooth and Hero, who we saw meet and then we saw right off into the sunset together. But there's a lot missing in the middle.
That's very fair.
With a baby, mind you. They ride off into the sunset with a baby.
Well, the baby wasn't with them, but she's going to show up later, so don't worry about it.
That was another one of those. Houndstooth was going to ask a question and Hero wasn't going to like it. And I
didn't think it was going to be that. I thought he was going to ask. I was confused because earlier in the book, he's like, I'm dying to ask why they left without me.
Right.
And then he's like, I have a question for you. And they're like, I'm not going to like this. And he's like, where's the baby? And I was like, why wasn't it the question you said you needed to ask? You set this up.
But it's again calling on our blind spot as the reader, because I hadn't realized that the baby wasn't mentioned.
That I did think, oh yeah, where is the baby? But at the first moment, I was like, wait, you said it was like Chekhov's gun, where he just got rid of the gun and instead handed him a water gun. It just didn't make sense in the moment.
It was one of those things where I think if it was a movie, Hero would have had a bundle that later turned out to be rations, but we assumed was a baby and then found out it wasn't when Houndstooth asked that question, and it would have been maybe a little more dramatic and felt better visually.
I mean, technically we should have known because that baby cries all the time. That's the one fact we know about that baby.
Yeah. I really appreciated the depiction of pregnancy and early motherhood. I mean, I'm sure it's not 100% realistic. I have no frame of reference, but it's not either completely rose-colored glasses or this is horrible, she made a huge mistake and ruined her life. It manages to hit a middle of the road for Adelia, who is the mother whose name we haven't said yet. And I realized it sounded like I could have been talking about Archie. But it manages to hit a middle of the road that I don't see very often.
I would agree. It was a very good look at motherhood. I have sisters who have been through motherhood, and so I can imagine going through that did to her and everything. So I thought that was a very interesting take. So well done.
I found the mastitis situation to be really interesting, and then I had to look up cabbage leaves, and that is a real thing that I had no idea about, and I was very surprised. But yeah, good on the author for doing their homework on that.
I do like that Adelia asked Archie to put some cabbage leaves on her like breasts, and she was like, "I'm not going to do that."
Yeah.
Apparently, this is still a thing today that if women have mastitis, they will put cabbage leaves in their bras, and it helps reduce inflammation.
The more you know.
I know. I was really shocked by that.
Given that Sarah Gailey is basing the whole premise of this story on like historical fact, I'm not really surprised that the use of cabbage leaves is also something that is true to life. That feels accurate to the level of knowledge and research that they have brought to this story.
That's very fair.
Someone, I don't remember who, called this a fantasy book earlier. And I would like to know, what aspect of this is fantasy? Hippos are real. The Mississippi is real.
Domesticating hippos is the fantasy part of it.
Okay.
Every article that I read about people trying to domesticate hippos, it ended tragically.
Thank you.
So
now I know.
That's the fantasy.
Basically dragons. Domestic hippos, those are dragons.
If it was me who called it fantasy, it's me just not knowing how to list genres, because it's definitely an alternative history, but I don't use that in my general discussions.
I wouldn't call this historical fiction.
No.
I was kind of being a smartass.
And I think that Sarah Gailey is considered in general an SFF author. Like their novel, what is it, The Echo Wife, is pretty firmly science fiction, or at least to my understanding, it's pretty firmly science fiction. We haven't actually read it yet. We had plans to read it, and then it got knocked off of the calendar in favor of other books.
It got squeezed out of the calendar.
It got squeezed out of the calendar. I would like to cover it next year, but like that's a science fiction. So I think that they write often in this kind of, science fiction fantasy genre. That doesn't mean that everything they write has to be considered SFF, but
no, I think it's also an interesting, not gray area, but there is literary fiction and there is genre fiction.
They're also published by Tor, and Tor is, I believe, primarily SFF.
They published The Wheel of Time, didn't they?
I think you're right. Actually, I have Memory of Light right here.
I know
that's Tor.
Yeah.
Well, and Laura told us it's fantasy. They domesticated hippos.
That's the most fantastical part of the story that I can wrap my head around.
I do want to say that I thought, like, one nit that I had was I felt they failed to use the surprise of the beginning character being the big bad in the second novella well, because you find out, and I was like, oh, that's shocking to know. Like, we know who that is from the first book. Like, he's in a scene. And then nothing comes of it. Like, he and Houndstooth have one interaction that doesn't matter. And then he just dies. It was very abrupt for me.
I actually completely missed that. I'm going to be honest. And I read this book over the last couple days. It's not like I put the book down and picked it back up in between. I did not connect that was the same name. See, you thought you were bad at names.
Well, no, it's not the same big bad in the first book, but in the first book, there's a scene in the opening.
Yeah, we can use names.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I don't remember his name.
We meet Parrish at the beginning.
Yes, we meet Parrish at the beginning. He's like a federal agent who has sex with Houndstooth.
And is the one who hires them for their heist at the beginning.
Yes. And then
The caper.
you find out he's like the evil guy in book 2. And Houndstooth is like, oh my gosh, he's like my big blue eyes and like all this stuff. And then they see each other once when like Parrish is about to die. And it felt like such a good way to use the plot. And then it felt wasted at the end.
I do think that there could have been done, like more could have been done with that and that reveal. Again, I feel like a lot of these issues maybe would have been solved if it had been written as a novel as a whole rather than 2 separate novellas.
Maybe I'm the only one, but I kind of read that last scene as Houndstooth manipulating Parrish to get eaten by feral hippos.
That was That was not how I read that scene.
Parrish had almost gotten away. And then Houndstooth is like, oh, lover from earlier. And he turns around and starts coming back.
That was not how I read that scene.
Why else would he call him back towards the feral hippos?
He didn't actually start going back that way, though. He just turned around, right?
Well, he turned around and stopped while he had almost gotten away. He was like a hair's breadth away from getting eaten by hippos.
If you hear your name being called, that's like your knee-jerk reaction is to stop and look for who's calling you.
Not if you're being chased by feral hippos. I'm going to lay that down.
Have you ever been chased by feral hippos?
Not personally.
I also didn't read it like that, but I love that reading. Like, I think that makes the novel so much better if Houndstooth is just being a manipulative, like, dick about it.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I love that reading.
I feel like Houndstooth hasn't been that manipulative thus far. Like, he's not that, I don't want to say he's not that smart, but like.
Well, he manipulates his way into the party. Like, we see him manipulate, not on a personal level, on more of a professional level.
But yeah, I feel like that takes a level of skill and cold-bloodedness that he hasn't exhibited in the book.
Well, I would push back on that only a little bit, just because, like, throughout the second novella, the whole point is he's losing, like, his mind, and he's a lot crueler than he was because of Hero.
That's true.
If we're living in this, he's cold-blooded enough to want that man to pay because it kept him from Hero, and like now they're in this position.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see him being cruel enough to do it in this moment based on this book. He doesn't seem like he's the smartest. You are right.
Hannah, I see a question here that I have an answer. Well, I have a personal answer for, so I'd like you to ask it.
The one, why did Cal exist?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was there like for service of the plot, but I just didn't understand why he was there. Like, he's there for a minute and then he's killed.
Well, I mentioned this a little bit in the non-spoilers. Oh, was it earlier in the spoiler section? I mentioned it earlier. But because Cal gets killed, that establishes that members of this gang are expendable. Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, you go ahead. I was going to say you made that point earlier, and then I was like, maybe I shouldn't ask this question because she answered it for me.
No, I like it. I also think Cal's existence really changed my reading of Adelia, because I made a note at the beginning, not the total beginning, but near the end of the first novella, that it really sounds like they deserve each other. I was not a big fan of Adelia in that moment, which I think was the point. And I think that was the point. Cal sucks pretty bad. And even though Adelia isn't interested in a relationship with him, she still chose to procreate with him. So
she has a really great quote about, and I forget what it is exactly because I didn't write it down, but it's something to do with she got what she wanted. Like, she wanted a child and she chose a father for her child, and then the father can just fuck off.
But we don't get that until much later.
That's true. We
At
don't
the
get
beginning,
it until much later.
All we know is that Cal has been looking for her and seems to be a love-struck fool. And maybe he was, who knows? And we don't really know what Adelia's relationship was with him. We know that he is a jackass, and we know that Adelia is a double-crosser. And so, as we go through the second novella, I feel like Adelia doesn't have character growth exactly, but a lot of character reveal that I would not have experienced as a reader if I had not had that relationship to base my assumptions off of in the beginning.
I do like that as a reasoning for Cal. I think.
I mean, he sucks. Like, I'm not going to argue that.
Well, and it felt like they were using him for the, like, to.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about how clunky some of these reveals were. Like, Travers, you have this note, so if you would like to say it, but the reveal of him, like, burning down the ranch, we all knew it was definitely that guy, but for some reason Houndstooth was like, well, it was definitely Cal. And it's like, okay, but like, who was pulling Cal's strings? What, like, you haven't thought past step one of this operation? Like, it felt very much, I was reading it, and I like your reading on Cal now, and I will definitely use that in my future, like, thought process. but it felt like he was only being used in service of like keeping Travers from being the guy who burned down the ranch. But none of us were shocked by that.
Yeah.
So
Definitely need an origin
Definitely.
story.
Yeah, I don't think Cal and Houndstooth was a compelling antagonism at all. It was just that sort of machismo horn smashing. That's not a phrase. You know what I mean?
I keep thinking that it just needed more page space. Like it needed more time to develop.
Yes.
Sarah Gailey deserved a novel where they could really flesh out every single one of these ideas.
Yes, exactly.
And we got a little snippet of that with the short stories at the end, which I really enjoyed. But we didn't get that in time for me to enjoy it during the novellas.
I loved the relationship between the vet and Ruby. They were actually my favorite romance. I loved like the book was like, Ruby loved the vet loved Ruby, Houndstooth hated the vet.
Yeah. And that's Houndstooth's ego, right? I think that's pretty consistent for him. Yeah, that was great. And we got to find out why Ruby had gold teeth, which was wonderful. Very cool detail. Very cool backstory. I like your summary, Sarah. Should have had a whole novel.
I mean, I enjoyed the 2 novellas and the short stories as they were, but I think that a lot of the problems that I personally had with it would have been solved had it been written and conceived as a novel. And just given the page space that it needed to develop all of these zany, plot points.
Hannah, you have contributed. I assume this is a pet peeve.
This is a pet peeve.
Yes.
It's not a words are weird, but you guys have a segment where you ask if the book is like the book jacket. And as Laura knows, I get infuriated because none of my book jackets accurately reflect the tone of the novel I'm reading.
Mm-hmm.
And we've actually thought a lot about this since you guys have a segment on it. But we think it's because most people who are writing a dust jacket are trying to tell you what the plot of the novel is. But many novels are not actually about the plot. They're about the characters. So when you're trying to evoke the plot and then you read it and it's actually about characters, it fails to evoke what you're actually looking into. And it frustrates me to no end. And every week on our podcast, I'm like, I read this book. I thought I was getting a crime drama. Really, I just got an insight into 7 different women's views on rape. Like, it's just like, it's not the same.
No.
Yeah. So that is my pet peeve of the week.
I think you're really right, though, when you say that it's used as a summary of the plot, which doesn't tell you really anything about the tone or what's actually going on. I mean, it tells you the beats of the novel, maybe, but it doesn't actually tell you what you're getting into.
You're not prepared for the reading experience.
Yeah.
Exactly. I want people to better show me the reading experience. So,
do you think that could be done by different, like, review blurbs or just better summaries? Or
does anyone read review blurbs? Those are all nonsense.
If it's on the back of the book, I might. Like, if there's a section in the beginning of the book that's just dedicated to the review blurbs, I'm gonna skip those.
Yeah, I don't really. I feel like you could also just say, like, I don't know if you guys know Storygraph, but the Storygraph app often tells you like the moods of the book you're about to read. So is it reflective? Is it like intense? Is it dark? Is it humor? But I think having those like bullet points at the beginning, like if it says reflective, I'm going to say like, well, then why read the plot summary? Because you're actually just reflecting on characters. So I think less book jackets where it's just telling you the plot of the novel and more people understanding the nuance of literature and how to evoke that in like a review of the book almost.
Well, that's more useful, I think. If I'm reading a book review, I don't want to know what's going to happen. I'm trying to decide if I want to read it or not. And it's a completely different question. We're not talking about a 6th grade book review where you give a summary.
Hannah actually has really good book reviews, I will say. I'm not.
She's my best friend. She's biased.
No, but your
No,
Bookstagram is great.
I'm not biased. Find her on Goodreads or on Bookstagram. She has really good reviews.
My most liked reviews are the books I hate because I rage hate. And then I go over to I have to prove why this book was bad. So I write 3 paragraphs on why it was a trash novel.
That always happens though, right? If you like a book, you don't want to talk about it because you want them to go read it. But if you don't like a book, let me tell you why this sucks.
I relate to that so much.
Mm-hmm.
I think my favorite episodes that we have done recording have been where we have really drastically different ideas on what we liked or disliked about the book, just because it's more fun to argue and it's gives you, I think, you have more data points if people are discussing the bits that they didn't like rather than just saying, no, this is great, go read it.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Our best episodes are where we talk about the characters because we're just fighting with each other about which characters we find stupid.
Many of them.
They get better and worse all at the same time.
That's not going to change. Let me tell you, that's not going to change.
The wheel weaves as the wheel goes.
So tell us a little bit about where we can find you guys on the internet.
Well, we are at OWWR Pod. That's OWWR Pod for On Wednesdays We Read. On Twitter, on Instagram, you can find us. You can email us, as Laura plugged earlier, at hourpod@gmail.com. You can also listen to all of our episodes. We have, a good 19 or 20 by the time this comes out, it sounds, about the first 5 books of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. Again, if you don't like Wheel of Time, if you're not interested to the plot, listen to the first 30 minutes. We always break down a different book or TV show we're watching.
Or our favorite fruits.
Or that was an entire episode where the first 30 minutes was about fruit. That is a real episode we have.
Lots of horse content.
Is that the episode that also talked about goats? Like your goats, or was that a separate episode?
We talk about goats.
There's lots of episodes where goats are mentioned. Also horses.
Yes, we have talked extensively on horses because we were both horse girls growing up, and Laura still identifies as a horse.
We're big on horse content.
But yeah, you can find us, listen to all of our episodes, and make sure you also, shout us out on all the social media platforms. And you can find my Bookstagram. It is Brews_and_books. I share a lot of content about the sweets I'm eating at the time and a lot of books and a lot of dog content. There's a dog in every third post. That's a guarantee.
That's my kind of guarantee. I gotta ask, okay, top level, what is your favorite fruit?
Okay, blueberries,
I
calling
knew
it.
Laura was going to pick blueberries. My problem is it's a combination. I like blueberries, pineapples, and strawberries together. It's the ultimate combo. You can't go wrong with it.
That does sound good.
That's a good combination.
I worked in a cafe for years where we made that every day.
Now, I will pose a question to the two of you. What is your favorite type of horse?
The one that doesn't bite me?
I'll ask an easier question because it is also canon in our podcast that Hannah does not eat pie. What is your favorite pie?
So I have a pie lady.
You didn't know you were open.
Okay, that's amazing.
No, this is a whole long story. 2 years ago or so, 2 years ago was not COVID times. Before COVID times, but near the end of the before COVID times, I was going into San Francisco and I was going to go take public transit. And there was a woman and her friend who were standing outside of the BART station, BART being the Bay Area Rapid Transit. It's the public transit system. And she made eye contact and was like, initially I was just going to pass by because anyone who's making eye contact and looks like they're going to talk to you is no thank you. But she was
especially on BART.
Especially on BART. But she was like, do you want this last piece of pie that I have? And I was like, okay. And it turns out, she said, well, I'm a baker. I'm trying to get a pie business started, but I've been making all of these test pies and I'll sometimes go and hand them out to like the homeless encampment that's nearby, or the BART station is just across the street from me. Sometimes I'll just go and give them out to BART people. or to people who are going on BART. So I took the pie and I took a card of hers, and it was very, very good. And a couple of months later, I ordered a pie from her and it was good. And then when COVID started, she started doing these pie pop-ups in her driveway where she would list her pie flavor and you could buy quarter pies or whole pies or whatever. And she's been doing that for the last year and a half or year. So every week, or basically every week. And she was following proper procedures. Like, we were all 6 feet apart. She was masked, et cetera, et cetera. But so every week I've been buying pie from my pie lady.
That's an amazing story. Yeah. I'm thoroughly I should caveat this. I don't eat fruit pie, but I'm very impressed that you have a pie lady.
She doesn't just make fruit pie. I mean, the fruit pie is what I prefer, but she's made like chocolate pies. She had a cake once. Yeah. She's made pumpkin pie. Like, she does all seasonal pies. She's very good. Pie in the sky. If you're in the East Bay. I think that I am the only person who listened to us in the East Bay. But
what about you, Lily? What is your favorite pie?
Do you consider cheesecake a pie or a cake?
That's cake.
Okay. It doesn't have it in the name. If that's considered a cake, then my favorite pie is probably pumpkin cheesecake.
That is what we call a loophole. So
loophole.
But we want to thank you guys so much for having us on. Like, we really
thank you.
Appreciate you inviting us on and everything. This has been amazing.
Oh, we had so much fun. Thanks for coming.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fiction Fans.
Disagree with us. We're on Twitter and Instagram at FictionFansPod. You can also email us at fictionfanspod@gmail.com.
If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and follow Fiction Fans and Our Pod wherever your podcasts live.
Thanks again for listening, and may your villains always be defeated.
Bye.